3:30 in the morning, June 17th, 1944, Saipan. The first thing the Marines felt was not fear, it was the ground. 44 Japanese tanks were moving out of the darkness, tracks grinding over coral, engines coughing black smoke into the pre-dawn air, infantry clinging to their hulls because there was no safer place to be. And every man in the American line understood the old rule. Rifles did not stop tanks. Pistols did not stop tanks. Courage did not stop tanks. If armor came at you and the anti-tank guns were not ready, you either got out of the way or you got crushed. That was the rule in 1944. Then a Marine machine gunner lowered the barrel of a Browning M2, not an anti-tank gun, not artillery, not a Sherman, a machine gun. He put the sights on the shape of a Japanese light tank coming through the dark, pressed the trigger, and watched .50 caliber armor-piercing rounds strike the steel. They did not bounce. They went through. That was the moment a rule died on Saipan, and by sunrise, the largest Japanese armored attack of the Pacific War had been broken into burning wreckage. The real shock was not simply that the Japanese attack failed. The real shock was what failed with it. An entire theory of armored warfare. A decade of Japanese confidence. And the belief that the Type 95 Hago, Japan's most common tank, could protect the men trapped inside it from ordinary battlefield weapons. Because the weapon that exposed the truth was already everywhere in the American line, mounted on vehicles, set into defensive positions, loaded by men who had been trained to use it against aircraft, trucks, landing craft, and infantry. The Browning M2. A machine gun had found the soft seam in an empire's armor. To understand why that mattered, you have to go back 11 years. Not to Saipan, not to the Marines, to Japan in 1933. Japan was already fighting in Asia, and the Imperial Army had a problem. Its older tanks were too slow for the war it thought it was preparing to fight. The Type 89 could crawl across a battlefield, but it could not keep pace with fast-moving infantry, trucks, and the new language of mechanized war. So the Army asked for something lighter. Something faster, a tank that could move with infantry, cross poor roads, survive rifle and machine gun fire, and support attacks against lightly equipped enemies. The result was the Type 95 Hago, a 7-ton light tank, a 37mm gun, a diesel engine, bell crank suspension, a road speed that looked impressive compared to what Japan had used before. On paper, it solved the problem. In China, it seemed to solve the problem in blood. The Hago rolled through forces that often had little armor and limited anti-tank equipment. Its guns smashed bunkers. Its machine guns cut down infantry. Its diesel engine kept moving where heavier vehicles struggled. Japanese crews learned to trust it. Commanders learned to expect success from it. And that was the most dangerous lesson the tank ever taught. Because the Hago was not built for the enemy Japan would actually face in 1944. It was built for the enemy Japan expected in 1933. At its thickest points, the Type 95 carried about 12 millimeters of armor, less than half an inch, enough to stop ordinary rifle fire, enough to make a tank crew feel separated from the battlefield, enough to make bullets sound like rain on a roof, but not enough to stop a heavy .50 caliber armor-piercing round at close range. Inside the tank, 3 men worked in a space that barely deserved the word space. The driver sat forward. The hull machine gunner sat beside him. and the commander stood alone in the turret. He had to observe, command, load, aim, fire, read the battlefield, communicate with other tanks when communication was even possible. And if his tank did not have a radio, he depended on flags, hand signals, and whatever could be seen through smoke, dust, darkness, and fear. The turret was hand-cranked. The sight picture was narrow. The hatch was dangerous, and every serious task inside the vehicle seemed to land on the one man who had the least room to perform it. Still, in the wars Japan fought early, the Hago worked well enough to hide its own flaws. Then came Khalkhin Gol in 1939. Against Soviet armor and anti-tank guns, the lesson changed. The Hago could be penetrated. Its 37-millimeter gun was not enough against better armored vehicles. Its protection was not enough against a modern opponent. The warning was written clearly. Japan read it, then moved on, because the war in China was still consuming men and machines, because steel, engines, and industrial capacity were limited, because Japan's strategy favored ships, aircraft, and the enormous gamble of a Pacific empire, and because a weapon can keep winning just long enough to convince its owners that it does not need to change. By December 1941, the Hago was still Japan's most available armored answer. In Malaya, Japanese tanks moved through terrain British planners had not expected tanks to use. In the Philippines, they fought American light tanks in close, confused terrain. Across the early Pacific campaigns, Japanese armor often arrived before Allied defenses were ready for it. The confidence survived. The steel did not get thicker. Then Saipan appeared on the map, a small island in the Marianas, roughly 1,250 miles from Tokyo. Close enough that if the Americans took it, B-29 bombers would soon be able to reach the Japanese home islands. For Japan, Saipan was not just another island. It was a door. And the Americans were forcing it open. On June 15, 1944, Marines of the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions came ashore under heavy fire. Sherman tanks rolled off landing ships. Supplies began stacking on the beaches. Artillery, ammunition, fuel, radios, bulldozers, engineers, field hospitals, all the machinery of American amphibious warfare began building itself into a beachhead. Japanese commanders understood the math. Every hour the Americans remained ashore made them harder to throw back, so the order went out. Before the beachhead became impossible to break, the 9th Tank Regiment would counterattack, 44 tanks, a mix of Type 95 Hagos and Type 97 Chihas. Infantry would move with them. The tanks would punch into the American line, shatter the beachhead, and buy time with steel and shock. In the dark before dawn on June 17th, Japanese crews climbed into their vehicles. They checked fuel, loaded ammunition, started engines. Some of those men had fought for years. They had seen China. They had seen jungle roads. They had seen bullets strike armor and fail. They believed because experience had taught them to believe that once the tanks moved, the men in front of them would have to answer with real anti-tank weapons. Not rifles, not ordinary machine guns, real weapons. The Marines heard the engines before they saw the tanks. Word moved down the line. Tank attack, tank attack. Crews woke up beside their weapons. Sherman crews climbed into turrets. Half-track gunners swung their mounts around. Bazooka teams moved into position. Anti-tank gun crews searched the dark for shapes, and machine gunners checked belts of .50 caliber ammunition. At 3:30 a.m., the Japanese attack came in. The tanks moved through uneven ground in the darkness, their engines straining, their commanders trying to see through smoke and shadow. Infantry clung to hulls and ran beside the vehicles, hoping the armor would open a path before American fire cut them down. Then the American line erupted. Shermans fired. 75-millimeter guns flashed in the dark. M3 half-tracks and anti-tank guns hammered the formation. Bazookas struck from close range. And Browning M2s, heavy machine guns the Marines had brought as standard weapons, began firing armor-piercing rounds into the Japanese light tanks. The physics were simple. The Type 95 carried about 12 millimeters of armor at its thickest points. The .50 caliber Browning, firing armor-piercing ammunition, could defeat more steel than that at the short ranges where the fight was happening. That did not make the M2 a magic weapon. It did not turn every machine gun into a Sherman. Against modern tanks with real armor, the rule still held. But against the Hago at close range, the old rule had an exception, and on Saipan, exceptions killed. Rounds struck thin turret plates, side armor, engine grills, vision ports, and seams. Some shattered inside, some tore through. In a tank that cramped, a penetration did not need to be dramatic to be fatal. There was no room to dodge steel fragments. No spare space between a man, a shell rack, a gearbox, and a hot engine. A tank designed to keep out rifle bullets was suddenly being hit by something much closer to a small cannon in practical effect. For Japanese crews, the mental shock may have been worse than the sound. Small arms fire was supposed to be noise. It was supposed to be impact. It was not supposed to enter the vehicle, but on Saipan it entered. By sunrise, 31 Japanese tanks had been destroyed or disabled. The attack had failed, not in a slow retreat, not in an orderly withdrawal. It had been broken. The wrecks sat near the airfield approaches and across the attack lanes, some burned out by tank fire, some smashed by anti-tank weapons, some riddled by heavy machine gun rounds that proved the thin armor had become a liability no one inside could argue with. This is the point where the story is often told too simply. It was not that one Marine with one Browning M2 destroyed the Japanese armored arm alone. The killing ground on Saipan was a combined storm. Shermans, half-tracks, bazookas, anti-tank guns, artillery, and machine guns working inside a prepared defense. But the discovery that changed the feeling of the war was sharper than that. A standard American heavy machine gun could hurt Japanese light armor, not scare it, not mark it, hurt it. And once Marines understood that, Japanese tanks stopped being a terror category and became a target category. After Saipan, the lesson traveled fast. You did not ignore a Hago. You did not stand in the open and pretend it was harmless. But you also did not need to treat it like a German Panther rolling through France. Aim for the side. Aim for the engine. Wait for the range. Keep firing. That knowledge mattered because the Pacific War was a war of islands. Every landing created the same question. Could the Japanese throw the Americans back before the beachhead hardened? And Japanese doctrine kept reaching for the counterattack. Night attacks, infantry charges, local armored thrusts. The problem for Japan was that after Saipan, the Americans began waiting for those tanks with less uncertainty. On Tinian, only weeks later, Japanese tanks again tried to break into Marine positions. They were met by men who had already absorbed the lesson. The 50 caliber was no longer just an anti-aircraft gun in the mental map of the battlefield. It was a light armor killer when conditions allowed. 7 Japanese tanks were destroyed in the fighting there. The pattern tightened. On Peleliu, Japanese commanders tried to adapt. If the Hago could not survive in a mobile charge, perhaps it could survive as a bunker. Tanks were dug into caves, ravines, and covered positions. Hulls disappeared behind coral and rock. Guns became fixed weapons. It was a logical answer. It was also a trap, because a tank used as a bunker loses the one thing a tank still has when its armor is poor: movement. American flamethrower tanks and infantry tactics answered the buried positions with fire, explosives, and close assault. The steel boxes that could not survive movement became steel boxes that could not escape. The Hago was being pushed out of its own role. On Iwo Jima, Colonel Takechi Nishi understood the problem better than most. He was not just an officer. He had been an Olympic gold medalist before the war, a man known beyond Japan's army. By 1945, he commanded tanks on an island where mobile armor had almost no future. Iwo Jima was volcanic ash, broken ground, prepared caves, and American firepower from sea, air, and land. Nishi buried his tanks. He used the island itself as armor. Only turrets and guns would show. For a time, it worked. Dug-in Japanese tanks could surprise advancing Marines and create real problems. A hidden gun is still a gun, and a tank under ash is harder to kill than a tank crossing open ground. But the American answer came with bulldozers, Shermans, engineers, flamethrowers, and patience. The ash was pushed away. The flanks were exposed. The buried tanks were smashed in place. By then, the Type 95 had become something almost tragic. A machine designed for fast infantry support in the 1930s had ended up buried like a bunker in 1945, waiting for an army with more steel, more engines, more fuel, more guns, and more time. Then came Okinawa. Japan committed the 27th Tank Regiment with Type 95s and Type 97s against an American landing force supported by hundreds of armored vehicles. By May 1945, no one watching the battlefield could pretend this was a fair technical contest. The Japanese tanks attacked because orders had been given. They were destroyed because the material facts of the war no longer allowed any other ending. Shermans, bazookas, anti-tank guns, artillery, and the same. 50 caliber machine guns that had helped expose the truth at Saipan. The Japanese armor was not just beaten. It was used up. That is the second half of the story. Not the single bullet. Not the single night, the system behind the bullet. Japan built roughly 2,300 Type 95 Hago tanks between the mid-1930s and 1943. That made it Japan's most numerous tank. But in the Industrial War, Japan had chosen that number was not a strength. It was a confession. The United States was building tanks, trucks, landing craft, guns, ships, radios, bulldozers, aircraft, and ammunition at a scale Japan could not match. American factories did not just replace battlefield losses. They buried them under production. The Browning M2 itself was part of that story. A weapon designed from First World War ideas, refined into a heavy machine gun that became so useful it seemed to appear everywhere, on half-tracks, on tanks, on anti-aircraft mounts, on defensive lines, on ships, on vehicles that had not designed as tank killers, but suddenly carried a weapon that could punish light armor when it came too close. The M2 did not win the Pacific War by itself. No single weapon did. But it revealed something devastating. Japan's light tanks had been built around an assumption that no longer existed. The assumption that the weapons most infantrymen carried could not penetrate them. The assumption that light armor was still armor enough. The assumption that speed and doctrine could compensate for steel that was too thin. The men inside the Hagos paid for those assumptions, not the engineers who wrote the original requirements, not the staff officers who decided where steel should go, not the planners who kept better tanks in small numbers for a home island defense that never came. The crews paid. They climbed into cramped compartments knowing, by 1944 and 1945, that American firepower had changed the meaning of their armor. They started engines anyway, because soldiers go where they are ordered, and because nations often discover the limits of their equipment through the bodies of the men sent to use it. That is why the Saipan story matters beyond the wreckage. It is easy to turn it into a clean weapon story. Machine gun versus tank, bullet versus steel, America versus Japan. But the deeper story is about the distance between capability and doctrine. The Browning M2 had the physical ability to defeat thin Japanese tank armor at close range. But armies do not fight only with physics. They fight with manuals, training, assumptions, habits, fear. The official rule said machine guns did not stop tanks, and as a general rule, that was sensible. A machine gun could not be treated as a reliable answer to modern armor, but the Pacific was not facing German heavy tanks. It was facing many Japanese light tanks, with armor thin enough for the exception to matter. Until combat made that exception undeniable, the knowledge remained incomplete. Somewhere between technical facts and frontline confidence, there was a gap. Saipan closed it with fire. After that, every burned Hago told the same lesson again. Tinian told it. Peleliu told it. Iwo Jima told it. Okinawa told it. By the end of the war, the Type 95 had been reduced from spearhead to relic, from mobile assault vehicle to dug-in pillbox, from symbol of Japanese mechanized confidence to evidence of strategic exhaustion. And the M2? It kept going. Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq. More than a century after its design lineage began, the Browning M2 is still recognized as one of the longest-serving heavy machine guns in modern military history. Not because it was perfect, because it occupied a useful space between small arms and cannon, because it could reach farther, hit harder, and adapt to more roles than planners first imagined, and because sometimes the most important capability on a battlefield is not the one written in the doctrine. It is the one discovered by the men desperate enough, skilled enough, or clear-eyed enough to try it when the old rule says it should not work. On the morning of June 17th, 1944, Marines walked among wrecked Japanese tanks on Saipan. They saw holes in armor that was never meant to face that kind of fire. They saw what happened when an empire sent crews forward in machines built for yesterday's enemy, and they carried the lesson with them to the next island, not as a slogan, not as a legend, as a simple battlefield truth. The tank is not what the manual says it is. The gun is not only what the manual says it is. The truth is where the metal meets. The most dangerous gap in war is not always between one army and another. Sometimes it is between what your weapons can do and what your doctrine tells you they can do. On Saipan, that gap closed in the dark. A machine gun fired. A tank stopped. And a rule that had protected armored men all over the world cracked open under .50 caliber fire.